value on my college education at that point in time. More on my transcendent graduation day at the close of my remarks. For now, I'm going to tell you a few personal stories that over time have given me 3 very valuable life lessons, 3 rules that I've lived by, and perhaps they may be helpful to all of you. They are lessons learned not from great successes, but rather mistakes or near mistakes that I made early in my life. Instead of outlining personal triumphs, I thought I'd share a few stories wrapped around inglorious disappointments that I experienced early in life. These events framed a coda that's worked pretty well for me over the years, and ones that I've tried to adhere to very closely. So, rule number 1, take risks. Smart risks are fine, but take risks. My first story is about recognizing that a mistake is not always a mistake. Sometimes it is a course correction. You won't make mistakes if you don't take risks, and you must take a few risks so you will make mistakes. Get used to it early, and you'll get the really bad ones out of the way early, and that's always a pretty good plan. My guess is that with reasonable confidence, I could divide those of you graduating today into 2 separate and distinct groups. There are those of you who know precisely what the next step is, whether on a graduate school, a job for which you've already interviewed and have been hired, a move to a new community that you've already selected. And then there are the rest of you. You know who you are. You have no notion whatsoever what's next, perhaps beyond tonight's party. Some of you are more than a little unnerved by the absence of a plan, and that's not so bad. Your parents would probably prefer just a little bit of unease. If you know precisely what your life's work is going to be as we sit here today, God bless you. However, if you don't have a clue as to your next steps, and freely acknowledge this, you're in very good company. I was squarely in your camp. Remember, some of us here, or at least one of us here, decided he'd rather be digging a hole than attending his commencement ceremony. For those of you who are absolutely certain you have your life's course set, never cease considering you may be wrong or perhaps not as right as you think you are. As for the rest of you, I can relate. Midway through my college career, I transferred from the University of Virginia, a public university, to New York University, a private school. My reason was straightforward. I wanted to become a journalist and felt to do so, I needed to attend journalism school. My father was not happy. NYU costs twice as much as UVA, and not insignificantly, he is a University of Virginia alum. He also, to be honest, was not terribly enamored with me wanting to become a newspaper man. We're all too liberal, as you've no doubt heard, and he was not very happy with that. But NYU had a journalism school, and UVA did not. What is interesting is that after I made that transfer, and after one class, and I mean this quite literally, one 50-minute class, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. The newspaper business, or at least the news side of the newspaper business, was not for me. That afternoon, I dropped out of journalism school and pursued a more conventional liberal arts degree. My father was no longer unhappy. In fact, to be frank, I aspired for him to be simply unhappy. He was way beyond unhappy. But you see, I knew at that time that I was not cut out for a career in newspapers. Was I wrong? Well, present evidence notwithstanding, you bet I was wrong, or at least half wrong. But better I acknowledge this mistake as soon as possible and move on. I was in the business of making decisions for me at that point in my life, and allowing a bad decision to go uncorrected only creates a second bad decision. Of course, there was more turmoil to follow. Absent a clear career choice, you can only imagine how pleased my father was as I immediately entered the work world following graduation, first as a ditch digger, and then following that in short order as a landscape specialist. I mowed lawns, and as an alternative energy specialist, I chopped and split firewood. You could say that the first 18 months following graduation were not working out all that well for me. So I packed my bags, I moved to Virginia and took the first job I could find in advance of ultimately continuing my education in graduate school. A pretty good plan. When you're without real direction, fall back on what you know. Stay in school. The story doesn't end there. More than a little ironically, that first job was at the local newspaper selling advertising. That was 30 years ago, earlier this year. Turns out, in retrospect, that I had the industry right, but I just did not understand what I was good at or what I would love. I often wonder what would have happened had I not had the will to acknowledge to myself early on that I'd made a bad call. I probably would have unhappily embarked on a career path in my early 20s that was all wrong for me, or at least largely wrong for me, and perhaps most likely not as right as it could have been, and in fact has been. Each of these three big decisions, to change schools, to attend journalism school, and then recant, apply for a business side job at a newspaper, could appear to be at odds with each other, at a minimum contradictory, if I'd been concerned how others viewed my decision, but I was not. In fact, I believe I was at best, admittedly somewhat awkwardly, homing in on the right choice and felt that each call was the right move at the time. All were risks, both from an educational perspective and from a personal relationship perspective with my family. But this is the time in your life when you must make decisions for you, not to align yourself with others' expectations for you. Not knowing your direction just now is not the issue. Not being willing to start down paths to find your direction is very much the issue. And not being able to admit you have taken the wrong path when your prior commitment has been absolute simply cannot happen. Take your do-overs now, because they will be much harder to come by in a few years. Times change. Today's certainty becomes tomorrow's mistake. Don't be afraid to acknowledge that and take the concomitant risk to either get on track or stay on track. Allow that when you have a change of mind or a change of heart, you may simply be vectoring in on your goal. Don't be afraid to see this and move ahead. And finally, never stop reminding yourself that decisions are not risks if they result in doing something you love. Rule number 2, be humble or be humbled, or the minute you begin to think you're important, you're not. If you think about those leaders you regard as truly great leaders, they are individuals who know the difference between absolute confidence in their convictions and maintaining a sense of humility. Natural leaders understand these characteristics are not mutually exclusive traits. When I was just a little bit older than most of you, I was made the publisher of a large weekly newspaper in southern Maine. I could not have been more excited with the prospect. It was a good promotion in a wonderful seaside community. It was all good. My first week on the job, the president of the company flew to Maine from Virginia to have dinner with my wife and me, and for a few hours talked of little else but how valuable I was to the company, what a long and successful career lay before me. For a 29-year-old, it was very heady stuff. My second week on the job, I was asked to fly down to Virginia to the company headquarters to again meet with the president. What else could I think but that my career was rocketing upward? This, of course, is the hubris of youth. My rocket augured in pretty quickly. As I boarded the connecting flight in Washington to head down to Virginia, I was greeted by 11 other publishers from newspapers also owned by that company, and was told that all these papers, including mine, were being sold to the New York Times Company. My response, and I'm quoting precisely here, "Oh no, not me. They had it wrong. I was told just last week how important I am, how critical I would become to the company's long-term success." Of course, my paper and me had been sold, and I was crushed. How could this happen to me? I was a rising star, the fair-haired boy. I was the company's salvation, their path to the promised land. I was special. It took me over a year to get over what I wrongly felt was this monumental betrayal. It was nothing of the kind. It was me believing I was important because I wanted to believe I was important, not because of anything I had actually accomplished. In time, I came to realize the setback was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. Not only did it create new opportunities for my family and for me, it prepared me for future setbacks. And I've had more than a few. You heard my brief resume there. I've been promoted 10 times in the past 30 years. But if I was going to be completely honest with you, about half of those promotions were not positions I sought. They were disappointments. Trust me, that's difficult. Living with professional disappointment is very tough. But that experience on the tarmac at what is now Reagan International taught me how to deal with disappointment, and of far more value, it taught me the importance of humility. Rather quickly, I might add. You could say the lesson is to discover the value of humility or risk humiliation. To this day, one of the folks who was on that plane regularly greets me with a very glib, "Look who's here, old oh no, not me."